All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors, by thanking Sammy and Malka Esterson for dedicating all of the shiurim and drashas this month in memory of their parents, Yitzchak Leib ben Aaron Cohen, Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avram, and Hinda Bas Henech Ephraim. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshamas will have an aliyah and the family Einuchama. We thank our week of learning sponsors, Danny and Gail Cutler, in honor of and as a zuchus for Seth and Rachel Rodenberg, and with great appreciation to all of the shiurim. Our Daf Yomi sponsors today, Mr. and Mrs. Shmuel Davis, in memory of Shmuel's mother, father, Sar Ben Leib, whose yahrzeit is today. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshama will have an aliyah and the family in a cham. And of course, we dedicate our learning in the zchus of Refuah Shalema for Ruchama Aviva Bas Shenechana and for Rachel Yehudis Bas Tova Gittel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, they will have a refuah together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. And Abossi, with that, let us continue. So we're continuing really in a fascinating sugya. Today I'm going to make sure that Amir Hashem we get a chance to see some of the halacha lamaisa, because I know that these sugyas could be a little bit, they're incredible, but they could also be a little bit challenging, especially now we're kind of splintering off into a number of sub-discussions. So remember again, we're still focusing on the topic here of Tumas Mashkin, right? Literally again, the halachas concerning the ability of liquids both to acquire Tumah as well as to transmit Tumah. That is our fundamental discussion. So also, remember again, we have an incredible amount of machlokes governing that in general. That machlokes actually began on Daf Tez Zayin Alav, just reorienting ourselves a bit. So that machlokes began actually on Daf Tez Zayin. So remember again, that was with first the testimony of Yosef ben Yoezer, and then Rabbi Yosef ben Yoezer said, the mashke be mitbachya, literally again, the liquids of the butcher chamber are tahar. So we had a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. What does that mean? Right? What does that mean? So is that tahar mamish, like literally no tumah, can't acquire tumah, can't transmit tumah? Does it perhaps just mean that they could acquire tumah but can't transmit tumah? Then about say we saw there was a girsa machlokes. Is it bei mitbachya? Is it bei midbachya? Is it the liquids of the mizbeach? Is it the liquids of the slaughter chamber? And again, so on and so forth. So we'll say we're continuing with this a little bit today. The Gemara is picking up today on the statement of Rav Yehuda. So remember again, about say towards the end of yesterday's daf, this was in the middle of Yud Zayin Amud Beis. So Rav Yehuda said as follows. Rav Yehuda made a statement, La Kol Tameh. So Rav Yehuda said that halacha lamaisa, any item that touches mashkin tmein, so any item that touches liquid, which is tamei, impure liquid, even misafek is going to be tamei. So therefore, I will say, which is another way of saying that Rabbi Yehuda holds that mashkin must be tamei midaoraisa, right? It must be biblical tumah that they have the ability to go ahead and acquire and convey, and therefore, even if something touches tamei mashkin misafek, halacha lamaisa, they become tamei. The item becomes tamei. But say the Gemara then ended yesterday. Remember, we ended yesterday's daf with saying Hadrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda retracted that position. He doesn't hold of that anymore. So we'll say. So now we're going to focus a little bit on trying to figure out what is the nature of that retraction. Say bailahu. So we'll say today's daf is Yudches 18. We're picking up on Yud Zayin Amud Beis, and we're picking up 6 lines up from the bottom. Ibailahu. It's beautiful. Very soothing. Very soothing. So Gemara says as follows: Mikelim hu dahader be ava ba'ochlin k'Rabbi Yosef b'Shimon Svirlei o dimon legamri hader. So listen to this interesting shaila. So the interesting shaila is as follows: when we say that Rabbi Yehuda retracted his position, so what is it that he retracted his position regarding? Is it just that he retracted his position ultimately again Mikelim, the ability ultimately again for liquids to go ahead and transmit tumah to kelim, but ultimately again, ochlin, when it comes to food, ultimately again, he still holds that liquids have the ability to transmit tumah, like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, or perhaps legamre hader beik Rabbi Meir, or perhaps he totally retracted his position in terms of liquids, and in fact, he's in alignment with Rabbi Meir. Bossy, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says over here. Rashi says, "Aval ba'ochlin Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon Svirlei." The mashkin mitamin ochlin midaoraisa. So we'll say, so when we say that Rabbi Yehuda retracted his position, so remember again, what does that mean? Let's focus on what we had. The original statement of Rabbi Yehuda was, it sounded like liquids could convey tumah to anything and everything. That was the Pashat's understanding of Rabbi Yehuda's statement. Then Rabbi Yehuda retracted. What's the nature of the retraction? Did he mean ultimately, again, that liquids can't convey tumah to kalim, to utensils, but they can convey tumah mid'oraisa to food, or perhaps he retracted and he holds like Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir holds that in general, liquids cannot convey tumah at all to anything mid-da'oraisa, and liquids could only go ahead and convey tumah to food mid-rabbanan. So we'll say that's the shaila. What's the nature of the retraction? So we'll say very interesting Gemara. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Tashmas. Let's analyze this. Para sheshasa mechatas. So let's listen to this interesting case. Let's say you have a cow which drank para aduma water. So we'll say, so again, remember you have para aduma water, and a cow accidentally drank para aduma water. So we'll say, remember again, how does para aduma water work? How does that work? Remember, we'll say it's reverse. Anything that comes in contact with that's tameh, it can make tahar, but anything that is tahar, it makes tameh. So you have a totally good cow that went ahead and drank para aduma water. So para sheshasa mechatas bisara tameh. Ultimately, again, I will say now you shech that animal. When you shech that animal, ultimately, again, its flesh becomes tameh. Right? The basar, the meat of the animal is tameh. Look at Rashi. Bisar tameh. Shemekabalos tuma mehen. The mechatos metabna afilu adam v'kelim. Because we'll say ultimately, again, so the flesh of the animal itself becomes tameh. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, batlu b'me'eha, top of Yudches. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, the water is bottled inside of the cow. It's bottled inside the cow. Now, look at Rashi for just a moment. Batlu b'me'eha. So first of all, again, because remember, once the cow ingests it, it's no longer fit to be used as para aduma water. Ve'ein od shman alehen, and the truth is, it no longer has the identity as para aduma water. So the Gemara will say. So let's look at Rashi. Rashi highlights the question. V'islev Rabbi Yehuda mashkin ba'ama mithamu ochel nehi debatli mitoras mechatas le'in delo havi tame avatoma l'tame adam v'kelim shem mashke tame milecha alayu. They're both saying, here's the question. So Rabbi Yehuda says that halacha l'maisa, when the animal ingests the para aduma water and you shech the animal, the meat is not going to be tameh. Now, 1 second. Let's look in the Gemara. But if you hold that Rabbi Yehuda, when he retracted his position, all he retracted was what? Just the ability for mashkin to convey tumah to kalim. But the ability for mashkin to convey tumah ultimately, again, to other food items, halacha l'maisa is still intact. Aval ba'ochlin kraviyosir b'shimin svirale amai batlu l'me'eha legamre. Why should the para aduma waters not be able to convey tumah to the meat? At least of what the Gemara says, nehi de tumah chamur lo metamu. Even if you want to say Abosai that it won't convey tumah chamur, like a high level of tumah, because after all, again, the waters have been ingested. Tumah kala miha nitmu. They should at least be able to convey a lower form of tumah. So what I see here, the shaila. So obviously, this seems to indicate the fact that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the ingested para aduma water does not convey any level of tumah to the flesh of the cow, to the basar of the cow, would seem to indicate to us that he issued a full-fledged retraction. That literally now what Rabbi Yehuda is saying is, I hold like Rabbi Meir, which means that really liquids can't convey tumah to anything mid-da'oraisa, and at most they convey tumah d'Rabbanan. To which the Gemara says, no. My bitlu b'me'eha. What does Rabbi Yehuda mean when he says that halacha l'maisa, that the paraduma waters is bottled inside of the cow? But the Gemara says, I'm sorry, my bitlu b'me'eha nami batlu mituma chamura aval tuma kala mitamu. It means that the waters no longer have the ability to convey what we call tumah chamura. So we'll say tumah chamura means the ability to go to be metame adam v'kelim, people and utensils. But the water absolutely does still have the ability to what? To convey tumah kala, which ultimately again is the tumah to food items. Good. So therefore, I will say, there's no proof over here. So it's very possible that Rabbi Yehuda still holds that halacha l'maisa liquids have the ability to convey tumah to food, but may just lack the ability to convey tumah to kalim. Michlada Tanakama Savar Tuma Chamura Nami Mitamu. So we'll say, now here's what's interesting. So fine, so the point over here is that from this case of Para Aduma, you can't necessarily glean what Rabbi Yehuda's present Shita is. So we'll say, here's what I know. What I know is Rabbi Yehuda in his first version held that pretty much liquids have the ability to convey Tumah to anything and everything. When I say anything and everything, I mean like Adam, Kalim, Ochlin, right? Food, utensils, people. Now, Rabbi Yehuda retracted that position. We're trying to figure out what's the nature of the retraction. Did he retract it? Mamish, retracted everything? Said he holds like Rabbi Meir, which is the most extreme sheet. Rabbi Meir holds that really liquids don't convey tumah to anything, and at most just convey tumah to other food items midrabanan. Or does he hold a more modified position that liquids can't convey tumah to kalim, to utensils, but they can convey tumah ultimately again to food items? So we tried to bring a proof from Paraduma, but even from Paraduma it doesn't seem to be like such a great proof. But I will say what ends up happening here is something very interesting. Michlada Tanakama Savar Tumah Chamura Nami Mitamu. So we'll say what's interesting to note is as follows. It sounds like what you're saying is based on the Tanakama, right, based on the first opinion, that even ingested para aduma water does convey full-fledged tumah. So which the Gemara says, ha bisara mitame. The Gemara says, after all, Michal Tanakam Savar tumah chamur nami mitamu, ha bisara tame. So ha bisara tame katani. To which the Gemara says, no. Kul Rabbi Hudi v'chisur mechsra. The truth is, the entire brisa reflects the view. Look at Rashi. V'ha bisara tame kamar v'delo time ela as habasar. So we'll say, the way the brisa is set up is it makes it sound like, according to the Tanakama, the water, the paraduma water, retains high-level tumah even once it's ingested by the animal. The problem is, all the brisa says is that, bless you, is that the flesh of the para is tameh, which indicates to us that halacha l'maisa it's only the flesh of the animal that's tameh, but that the waters would not be able to convey tumah to adam and kalim, which sounds like it doesn't have high level tumah. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says you're right. Rather, the Gemara says kul Rabbi Hudi. In fact, the entire brisa is Rabbi Huda v'chisure mechsera, and ultimately again the brisa is just missing a couple of critical pieces of information, which we are now going to fill in. V'halchi katani. Here we go, Bosei. Parashashasa mechatas. It's a very interesting case. Right, so you have a cow that drinks mechatas, right? So paraduma water. Again, obviously not to be confused. It's obviously not the same. It's not the paraduma that ingests paraduma water, of course, right? Again, para is just stam an animal, right? Stam an animal. So again, my cow happens to drink my paraduma water. So now we'll say what happens now. I shecht my cow. I have the meat. What's the status? A para sheshasa mechatos bisara tame. Ultimately, again, its flesh is going to be tame. So it says the Gemara Medran. When is that so? Tumakala. So we'll say, when we say that the flesh is tumah, we'll say, what does that mean? Tumakala. We'll say tumakala means a lower form of tumah, which means that the only ability of the water, of the liquid, is to convey tumah to ochlin, to food. But that water, bless you, would not have the ability to go ahead and convey tumah to adam and kalim. It wouldn't have the ability to convey tumah ultimately again to people and to utensils. So it only has a lower form of tumah. Aval tumah chamur lo Rabbi Yehuda omer batlu b'me'eha. Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda holds that halacha l'maisa, once the paraduma waters are ingested, ultimately again they are batul. What does it mean they're batul? So there's logic here. Once an item has been ingested by an animal, to a certain degree it loses its identity as mashkin. Right, it's no longer mashkin. Now, whatever it is, in Maseches Chulin, they call this peresh. It's like stuff inside of the animal. But once an animal ingests something, by definition, it loses its primary identity. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer batlu b'me'eha. Ravashi says, Li'olam batlu b'me'eha legamrei mishum dahavili mashkes rev. So Ravashi disagrees, and Ravashi says, so in this model of Rabbi Yehuda, what we're suggesting over here is once the animal ingests the paraduma water, essentially its identity as mashkin is compromised, and therefore all it has is the ability to convey tumakala, which means the most that it's going to be metame is what? Is the basar, is the actual meat of the para, but cannot convey tuma to adam or to kalim. Comes along Ravashi, and Ravashi says the truth is, once the animal ingests the paraduma waters, it is batal gamre. But it totally loses its identity as mashkin. Mishum dahavi mashke saruach. Because we'll say at the end of the day, it's now considered to be a putrid liquid. So Rav Ashi's shita, which is pretty intuitive as well, which is that pretty much once an animal ingests something, that ingested item loses its identity in totality. In other words, there is no longer mashkin over here. There's just stuff inside of the animal, and once it's just stuff inside of the animal, it loses its total ability to convey any level of tone. Look at Rashi. We'll say the habli mashke saruach v'tanya b'toras kohanim v'chol mashke sheishasa v'chol kli yitma prat lemashke saruach. Ultimately, we'll say so. This comes to exclude a putrid liquid. So therefore, I will say, interestingly enough, what it's so. Remember, did we really answer our question? It doesn't sound like it, because remember, we were just trying to figure out what was the extent and nature of Rabbi Yehuda's retraction, but it doesn't appear that we got full clarity about it. We got bonus material, right? We got an incredible case about about a para ingesting paraduma waters and the impact or the status of those mashkin after they're ingested by water, by the animal, but we still don't seem to have clarity about the scope of the retraction of Rabbi Yehuda. Fine. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon Omrim, li'ochlin tmein, lekelim tehorim. Supposed to listen to this. So Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon come along and they say as follows: that halacha l'maisa, if you have mashkin tmein, right? I have impure liquids, and there's a suffix as to whether or not those impure liquids touched food items or utensils. So we'll say, so what's the halacha? So Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon will say, suffix maga by ochlin is tamein. So if I have tummy liquids and there's a suffix whether or not they touched food or not, halacha l'maisa, the food will be tummy. If there's a suffix, if they touched ochlin, the food will be tar. Now we'll say, why are we framing this in terms of suffix? Because we'll say, remember again, how you paskin in terms of suffix tells you a lot about the nature of the isser. Right? After all, again, because remember, a suffix daraisa will be l'chumra, a suffix drabanan will be l'kula. So therefore, I will say this statement is another way of saying Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon say that midaraisa, mashkin tamein, impure liquids, have the ability to go ahead and convey tuma to ochlin, to food. But midaraisa, mashkin tamein, do not have the ability to convey tuma to kalim. So Amar Rabba Barachan Amr Lakish, Rabbi Yossi b'shitas Rabbi Akiva Rabbo Amra. Rabbi Yossi ultimately again holds of the shita of Rabbi Akiva, his Rebbe. What did Rabbi Akiva dash? Well, so this is actually very interesting. So look at Rashi for just a moment. Actually, no, not yet. Sorry. So the Gemara's fine. So he calls her, but it's not. This just tells us about the relationship between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Akiva. Good. So the Gemara says as follows: the Darish. What does Rabbi Akiva say? The Darish. So let's listen to this. It's yitma yitameh. So we're going to see this drush in just a moment. This is not about. So here we go. Bo bayom darsh Rabbi Akiva. On that day, Rabbi Akiva dash. And I will say that day. Rashi points out over here. Biyom sheminu es Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah l'nasi. So we'll say this is the famous story in Mesachas Brachas, right, where they deposed Rabbi Gamliel and they went ahead and they appointed Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. That's the story. Harei Keben Shivim Shani was only 18 years old when he was appointed. There was an incredible, like the floodgates of Torah opened on that day. So whenever throughout Shas you see the phrase Bo Bayom Darash, it's amazing. Throughout the entirety of Shas, whenever you see the phrase Bo, on that day they darshan, Bo Bayom always refers to that day when Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was appointed as the Rosh Yeshiva. It's pretty incredible. So the Gemara says, Bo Bayom Darash. Bo Bayom Darash Rabbi Akiva, V'chol Kli Cheres Asher Yipol Mehem. So we'll say, so the pasuk over here is as follows: V'chol Kli Cheres Asher Yipol Mehem El Tocho. So we'll say, if you have an earthenware vessel and you have a davar hatame which falls into the inside of that vessel, Kol Asher B'socho Yitma. Whatever is inside the vessel at the same time, whatever in the interior of the vessel, at the same time that the davar hatame falls in, ultimately again Yitma. Voso sishboru. So we'll say this just as an aside. It's not really our topic, but remember again, kli cheres is unique in that kli cheres, earthenware vessel, becomes tummy through its airspace. So, for example, if you were to take a dead sheres and you were to hold a dead mouse by its tail and you were to dangle it inside of the kli cheres, even though again it doesn't come in contact with any part of the kli cheres is metame me'aviro. It becomes tame ultimately again from its airspace. And we'll say not only that, but even if there's something else, tahar, inside of that kli cheres, the fact that you're dangling something tamei inside of the airspace, halacha l'maisa, the other item inside the kli becomes tamei as well. The lashon Rabbi say is yitma v'osos ishbaru. But say then the next part of the pasuk, which is really what we're focusing on, mikala ochel asher yachel asher yava lav mayim yitma v'chamash gesher yifseh. Fine. So we'll say, listen to this. Rabbi Akiva's drasha was like this: v'chol kli cheres asher yipol mehem eino omer tamei ela yitma. So we'll say, interestingly enough, the pasuk doesn't say. So we'll say, so let's, a simple case. I have a kli cheres. Inside of the kli cheres, I have a piece of bread. What happens? I dangle the dead sherets inside of the airspace of the kli cheres. So what's the halacha? The piece of bread is tamei. Piece of bread is tamei. Rabbi Akiva pointed out the Torah doesn't use lashon of tamei, but rather the Torah uses lashon of yitma. Yitma means what? Yitma acherim. So we'll say, what Rabbi Akiva is pointing out over here is, if you look at the word yitma, yut, tes, mem, aleph, without nekudos, that could be vocalized as yitma. It could also be vocalized as yitamei. Yitamei. Yitamei means what? It will convey tuma to something else as well. So the Gemara says, Limeid al kikar sheni, sha'osa shlishi b'chulin. Rabbi Akiva says, you learn from here that halacha l'maisa, that a sheni has the ability to make a shlishi when it comes to chulin. I will say now, we'll see exactly where Rabbi Akiva gets that from. But halacha l'maisa, again, he points out the notion that you see from here that yitma, yitamei, that a sheni can make a shlishi by chulin. V'hacha hechidarish. So we'll say ultimately again, where's the drasha? So here we go. V'chamashke asher yishaseh b'chol kli. So we'll say quotes over here from the mashke. The pasuk is v'chomashke asher yishaseh b'chol kli yitma. Ultimately, again, any liquid that is drunk out of a kli, ultimately, again, yitma, excuse me. So the Gemara says, yitma l'tamei tumas ochlin. So ultimately, again, yitma means it contracts tumas ochlin. Ata omer l'tamei tumas ochlin, or ein l'tamei tumas mashkin. So I'll say, so remember again, what does this mean? So we'll say this is actually very interesting. So now, remember, in the second part of the pasuk, so the Torah transitions now from food to drink. Right, and the Torah tells me that Allah l'maisa v'chol mashker sher yishaseh, any liquid you have, b'chol kli yitma. Yitma, again, remember, Rabbi Akiva's entire drasha is yitma yitamei. So it teaches me that mashkin have the ability to convey tumah to ochlin. Liquids have the ability to convey tumah ultimately to solids. So the Gemara says, so one more time, so the Gemara says, tumas ochlin, atomar l'tamei tumas ochlin, o ena l'tamei tumas mashkin. But maybe not. Maybe the pasuk is teaching me that mashkin have the ability to convey tumah to other liquids, to which the Gemara says, lo kach haya. That is not the way we establish it. So both say this is actually very interesting. There's two things happening over here. That Rabbi Akiva, number one, is espousing the idea that halacha l'maisa, a sheni can make a shlishi by chulin. Again, we'll develop that idea in just a bit. He also is highlighting something else, that mashkin have the ability to convey tumah to ochlin, but not to other mashkin. In the same way that ochlin have the ability to convey tumah to other mashkin, but not to other ochlin. So remember, liquids can convey tumah to food, and food could convey tumah to liquids, but liquids can't convey tumah to other liquids, and food can't convey tumah to other food. Now that notion that food can convey tumah to other food, we already saw that before. We already saw that in the beginning of the Sugya of Chanina, right? Because again, that's why the Gemara had to get onto this whole yisod. Remember, the Gemara asked by Amud Aleph of this Sugya, if you have two pieces of tamei meat, how does one piece of meat convey tumah to another piece of meat? Solids can't convey tumah to solids. Remember, the Gemara developed this idea that really one of the tamei pieces of meat had liquid on top of it, and the liquid was what conveyed tumah. So again, so we've seen this already. So the Gemara says, "Milo kachaya." What does that phrase mean? This is not the way that it was. So first of all, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, "Asher yipol mehem al tocho v'tanya ba'kol shokt." And just to catch up a little bit, Rashi says over here, "Afapi shalom naga elanitla." Actually, we don't have to. We spoke this outside. So the Gemara says, "What does it mean?" Milo kachaya amrav papa lo matzinu tuma she'ose kiyotzebo. So Rav Papa says what it means is that so Rabbi Akiva is teaching us, and this is one of the incredible yisodos by tuma, that by tuma a davar hatamei cannot make a like item tamei, which Rav Osai means, which is another way of saying, liquids can't convey tumah to other liquids. Food can't convey tumah to other food. So the Gemara says, Ravina Amar migufe dekra nami lo matzis amrit. So we'll say the Gemara, so Avina says, even from the pasuk itself, ultimately I'm going to establish principles. The Gemara says, Yitma l'tamei tumas mashkin. Ultimately, when we say Yitma, Yitma means that what? It has the ability to convey tumas mashkin. Yitma the seif l'tamei tumas mashkin. Because if you think that at the end of the pasuk is talking about the ability for liquids to convey tumas to other liquids, Yitma dereisha nami l'tamei tumas mashkin, and then you're going to tell me that the first part of the pasuk is also talking about the ability to convey tumas mashkin. If that's the case, na'arvinu v'nechtavinu. We'll say, why do you have to state the same thing twice? But combine them together and write it once. Mikala ochal asher yachel, asher yava lav mayim, v'chol mashke, asher yishaseh b'chol kli yitma, trei yitma lamali. We'll say, if they're both talking about the ability of mashkin to convey tuma, then why do you need the same thing written twice? Ella yitma dereisha l'tamei tumas mashkin. Rather, we'll say, you have to say that halacha l'maisa. The yitma of the first part of the pasuk is talking about ultimately again tumas mashkin, but specifically what? The ability of ochel to convey tuma to mashkin. Yitma de seifa l'tamei tumas ochlin, and ultimately again the yitma of the seifa is telling me the ability of what? Mashkin to convey tuma to ochlin. So therefore, this is really quite fascinating. Rabbi Akiva's entire drush was the whole pasuk is teaching us. The beginning of the pasuk is teaching us the ability of ochel, of food, to convey tuma to liquids. And the end of the pasuk is teaching me about the ability of liquids to convey tuma to food. But an incredible yesod emerges from this, which is what? That tuma cannot be spread amongst like items. That halacha l'maisa, again, liquids can't convey tuma to liquids, solids can't convey tuma to, or food can't convey tuma to food. They can only convey tuma to one another. Ve'ima l'tamei asakelim. Maybe the pasuk is coming to teach me that mashkin have the ability to convey tuma to utensils. V'lav kavachomer. But it says, wouldn't this be a kavachomer? After all, again, umakli shemetame mashke en metame kli. So we'll say if a kli. So we'll say let's analyze this. Maybe the pasuk is coming to teach me that halacha l'maisa liquids could convey tuma to utensils. The Gemara says it won't work, and it's a kavachomer. I'll tell you why. Umakli shemetame mashke en metame kli. We'll say a utensil which can convey tuma to liquids. Yet one utensil cannot be metame another utensil. Mashkin haboin machmos kli. Eino din shlei tamu asakelim. Then I both say liquids, which in general, both say now remember, in this case, how is a liquid becoming tame? A liquid is becoming tame because of its contact with the kli. So ultimately, again, if the liquid itself, which is becoming tame because of its contact with the kli, certainly should not have the ability to make other kalim tame. So meaning you hear the kavachomer. If ultimately kalim, which can make liquids tamein, can't make other kalim tamein, then a liquid which contracts its tuma initially from a kli certainly will not have the ability to make other kalim tamein. The ema kilometamu mashkin abon machmas kli. So we'll say so maybe we could say that ultimately again that when can't liquids convey tuma? That's maybe when the liquid originally contracted its tuma from a kli. Avamashkin habon machmas sheretz hachanami dibentamu. But I both say if let's say the mashkin, let's say the liquid contracts its tuma from an av. Maybe if the liquid contracts its tuma from an av, maybe under those circumstances, it should be able to convey tuma to a kli. To which the Gemara says, "Mashkin habon machmas sheretz miksivi." Both say, did the pasuk mention that? Did the pasuk is that the topic of the pasuk? Is the pasuk talking about mashkin that contracted tuma from a sheretz amud beis? V'lav mikava chomer kaasi. Rather, again, we clear out from the kav chomer. Again, I will say one more time, uma mashkin habon machmas kli mitamin mashkin habon machmas sheretz. So we'll say, if ultimately again, mashkin that become tamei as a result of a kli have the ability to convey tuma to mashkin habon machmas sheretz. I'm sorry, let me see, I read that wrong. The Gemara says, mashkin habon machmas kli mitamin. But say if ultimately again mashkin which go ahead and become tamei through contact with a tamei utensil have the ability to convey tuma, then mashkin habon machmas sheretz lo kol shekain. Then all the more so ultimately again mashkin that become tamei through a sheretz, which also means direct tuma exposure, should certainly be able to go ahead and convey tuma. And I both say what the Gemara is suggesting is as follows. Remember, from the previous kavachomer, what did I learn? I learned mashkin could go ahead and we made a kavachomer. The kavachomer was if kalim can't go ahead and make other kalim tamein, then certainly mashkin, which become tameh as a result of contact with a kli, can't make another kli tameh. To which the Gemara suggests, well, maybe that's only ultimately, again, if the kalim contract, if the mashkin contract tumah from a kli. But if a mashke contracts tumah from an av, like a sheretz, maybe it should be able to go ahead and make a kli tameh. To which the Gemara says, wouldn't that be a kal v'chomer? If at the end of the day, mashkin, which become tameh as a result of contact with the kli, have an ability to transmit tumah, then certainly mashkin, which become tameh because of direct exposure to a sheretz, should have the ability to transmit tumah. And also what the Gemara says, in parentheses, maybe mashkin that come in contact with the sheretz should even have the ability to transmit tumah to what? To kalim. To which the Gemara says, no. Dayo lava minadin lios kinidon. We'll say that halacha l'maisa, we'll say in general, whenever you learn something out from a kal v'chomer, the item, we'll call it the derivation halacha, can never be stronger than the source halacha, which makes sense, right? If I'm deriving B from A, so really B could replicate the principles of A, but B can't be stronger than A because A is the source for B. So if I'm learning out the ability for mashkin, which came in contact with a sheretz, to transmit tumah, and where am I learning that out from? From mashkin that came in contact with a kli, what does that tell me? That tells you that mashkin that come in contact with the sheretz can be no stronger than mashkin which come in contact with a kli. And I will say mashkin that come in contact with a kli could go ahead and convey tumah to other ochlin, but can't convey tumah to what? To kalim. So to mashkin that came in contact with the sheretz also can't convey tumah to other kalim. Beautiful. So the Gemara says yitma dereisha hechidar. So we'll say, what do I do with the yitma in the beginning of the pasuk? Rashi says over Yitma Dereisha Gabe Ochel Hechi Darish Le Rabbi Akiva. Right? What does Rabbi Akiva do with the first Yitma of the pasuk? So we'll say. So remember again, this is talking about V'chol Kli Cheres Asher Yipol Mehem El Tocho Kol Asher Besocho Yitma V'Osos Yishros. We'll say this is the Yitma by Ochel. So what does Rabbi Akiva do with the Yitma by Ochel? To which the Gemara says Yitma Dereisha Hechi Darish Mikol Ochel Asher Yachel Asher Yavo Alav Mayim Yitma. So we'll say so again. He quotes over here the pasuk that says as follows. Same pasuk, right? We call the ochel sheyachal asher v'olamayim yitma yitame. Yitma l'tame es hamashkin. Both said to teach me that what? That halacha l'maisa, if food becomes tamei, food ochlin have the ability. Remember, we'll say this is the constant yitma yitame drasha. To remember again that word yitma doesn't say tamei breath, it says yitma, which could also be vocalized as yitame, has the ability to convey tumah. So therefore the Torah is teaching me that when food becomes tamei, it has the ability to transmit tumah to mashkin. So the Gemara says, atum tamei es mashkin el tamei es akli. So I don't know, how do you know that the pasuk is coming to teach me that food has the ability to convey tumah to liquids? Maybe it's teaching me that food has the ability to convey tumah to kalim. To which the Gemara says, Amrit kal v'chomer. We'll say to that, we say it's a kal v'chomer. Uma mashka shemetame ochel eno metame kli. So we'll say, now watch this. If liquid, which does have the ability to convey tumah to ochel, eno metame kli. So let's remember again, we've established this already, that halacha l'maisa, mashkin only have the ability to convey tumah to ochlin, right? Remember again, mashkin have the ability to convey tumah to ochlin. They don't have the ability to convey tumah to what? To other mashkin and kalim. So we'll say now we've left mashkin, we're into ochlin. So now what we're suggesting is that when it says yitma, Rabbi Akiva's drasha is teaching me that when food becomes tamei, it has the ability to convey tumah to other liquids, not to other, meaning to liquids. So Gemara says, maybe he's teaching that it has the ability to convey tumah to kalim. To which the Gemara says that's a kal v'chomer. Uma mashke shemetame ochel enu metame kli. If when it comes to liquid can convey tumah to food, but yet does not have the ability to convey tumah to a kli. Ochel she'ein metame ochel. So ultimately, again, food items are both say which do not have the ability to convey tumah to other food items, which again is one of the yisodos in tumah. That I will say, remember again, the same way that in general, with the exception of tumas mace and metal, there is never a lateral transference of tumah. Along in that same non-lateral transference of tumah is that Tumah can't be passed along between like items. So Mashkin can't give it to Mashkin, Ochlin can't give it to Ochlin, Kalim can't give it to Kalim. So the Gemara says, so one more time, I'm sorry, I shouldn't disrupt the Kavachomer. If a liquid which conveys Tumah to Ochel doesn't convey Tumah to a Kli, then Ochel she'ein matame Ochel, then I will say food items which cannot convey Tumah to other food items, Einov din shelo yitma hakli. All the more second about goes without saying that it should not convey Tumah to a Kli. Hamani makayim yitma. So also therefore when the pasuk says yitma, which tells me that food does have the ochlin, do have the ability to convey Tumah to something else. What's the something else? Letame es hamashkin shenalulin lekabel Tumah. There will say the pasuk of yitma, the word yitma by ochlin teaches me that food has the ability to convey Tumah to mashkin. Because let's listen to this lashon, shein alulin lekabel Tumah. Because everyone knows that ultimately, again, mashkin are alulin. It means like they're receptive to Tumah. Mashkin are receptive to Tumah. So the Gemara says, "My area mashkin mishum da alulin lekabel Tumah." So we'll say, what does this mean? That food conveys Tumah to mashkin. Ochlin conveys Tumah to mashkin because mashkin ultimately again are alulin. Are fit. What does that mean? Typically, mishum delekami diachrini. Achrina, I will say, ultimately, again, do you know why food conveys Tumah to mashkin? Because the truth is, there's no other alternative. In other words, that halacha l'maisa, I will say, halacha l'maisa, the lashon of yitma tells me that not only does the item in the pasuk contract Tumah, but it conveys Tumah. So now I know that solid food, ochlin, conveys Tumah. So I will say, when I go down my list of what ochlin could convey Tumah to, I'm exceptionally limited. Because remember again, it can't ultimately again refer to ochlin, to other ochlin. Why not? Why not? That's lateral transference. That doesn't work. It can't be kalim. Can't be kalim because those are the reasons we said before. So the only thing I'm really left with, halacha l'may says mashkin. So just like the pasuk, we'll say. Remember, we're working backwards a little bit. Based on the pasuk of Yitma, the word Yitma, I know that Ochlin has the ability to convey Tumah to something else. And just by process of elimination, the only thing I'm left with is the ability of Ochlin to convey Tumah to Mashkin. Yet the Brisa says that Ochlin conveys Tumah to Mashkin because Mashkin are alulin lekabel Tumah. They're really like a little bit more receptive. So what does that mean? To which the Gemara says, watch this. V'chi kamar, v'chi tema, Ochel chamer de metame mashkin nitami likli. So I say you might have thought that halacha l'maisa that ultimately again that ochel should also have ochel, which is more chamer, should also have the ability to go ahead and convey tumah. Look at Rashi. V'chitema ochel chamer. Look at Rashi. I'm sorry, I'll say just one moment. Mimashka. So you would have thought in general, but say ochlin food has a more chamer status than liquids. How so? The ilu mashke. So we'll say, this is interesting. You might have thought that ochel ultimately again it's more chamer than mashke. And I will say, this is very interesting. How is ochel more chamer than mashke? So listen to this. Because an ochel can be metamea mashke, whereas a mashke can't be metamea mashke. So therefore again, quote unquote, ochel has a chumrah above mashke. So I would have thought that because ochel has a chumrah, therefore what? Ochel should also be able to convey tumah to a kli. To which the Gemara says, "V'chitema ochel chamer de metami mashke nitmei lekli." To which the Gemara says, "No. Hahu chumrah de mashkin hu de mishum de mashkin alulin lekabel tumah." To which the Gemara says, "No. At the end of the day, the reason why halacha l'maisa ochlin are able to be metame mashkin is because mashkin have a specific chumrah, have a specific, we'll call it stringency lagabe tumah that really makes them a bit more receptive to tumah. But say, what makes liquids more receptive to tumah than anything else? This is really quite fascinating. The Gemara says, "Umahi alilasan." What's the extra? Why is it that mashkin are considered to be more receptive to tumah? The Gemara says, "Shemakablim tumah below hechsher." This actually is quite fascinating because they're both saying mashkin are the one thing that don't require hechsher in order to be makabel tumah. Well, so what does that mean? It's really quite fascinating, which is every other item, in order for it to be makabel tumah, we'll say what has to happen? What has to happen? It has to come in contact with a liquid. The only thing that doesn't have to come in contact with a liquid in order to become receptive to makabel tumah is what? Is a liquid. So this is just interesting. So the Gemara just says that it could very well be that halacha l'maisa mashkin kind of have this, they have a almost like a propensity, or they just have almost like a built-in sensitivity towards tumah that nothing else has, for the simple reason that they do not require hechsher. Good. So the Gemara says, Yitma dein osek bo. So also, remember again, Yitma, Rabbi Kiva also darshan, the Gemara of darshan, that's what Yitma also teaches me, that you can't spread tumah from like items, right? Ochlin can't give it to Ochlin, Mashkin can't give it to Mashkin, right? Ochlin to give it to Mashkin, Mashkin can give it to Ochlin, but you can't spread between, or Kalim can't give to Kalim. So the Gemara says, do we learn that from here? I thought we learned that from somewhere else, from another pasuk. V'chiyutan mayim al zera, v'nafa min nivlasam, tamehu. So remember again, the pasuk says that it is a hechsher tumah if water will fall upon a detached seed, and then again an avela, an animal carcass, right, which is tameh, will ultimately fall on the seed. Tamehu. Ultimately, again, the seed becomes tameh. To which the Gemara says, "Hu tameh ve'ein oset tumah kiyotzeba." The item becomes tameh, but like items cannot spread tumah to each other. So I thought that pasuk is the source for the inability of like items to spread tumah to each other. Not this pasuk here, not Yitma. To which the Gemara says, Chad b'mashkin abayin machmas sheretz, v'chad b'mashkin abayin machmas kli. Both say it's actually talking about two different cases. One pasuk is talking about a rishon and teaching me that mashkin can't convey tumah to others, which become tameh as a result of contact with the kli, tameh kli. That those mashkin also can't convey tumah to other mashkin. Now both say, why do I need two cases? Utzrichi, di'ashmoin mashkin abayin machmas kli mishum dolachamiri. Because I might have thought maybe it's only in the case of mashkin which become tameh as a result of contact with a tameh kli that can't make other mashkin tamein. Why? Because ultimately, again, that is a lower form of tumah. But I would say maybe if mashkin came in contact with an av, with a sheretz, maybe under those circumstances, the mashkin can convey tumah to other mashkin. So therefore, again, the pasuk teaches me both. So we'll say if that's the case, then just teach me the halacha by mashkin abon machmas sheretz. So both say, once you teach me that halacha lemaisa, even if mashkin become tameh as a result, ultimately of what? Of direct exposure to an av, that they still can't convey tumah to other mashkin, even if that's what you teach me, then certainly I'll learn that's what? That mashkin that are tameh machmas kli certainly can't convey tumah to other mashkin either. To which the Gemara says, you're right, but nevertheless, milsa de asya b'kavachomer, tarach v'kasav lakra. But I say sometimes even something that you can learn out from a kavachomer, the Torah goes out of its way to teach it to me through a pasuk. Say for say ultimately again, what's coming out over here is as follows. Coming out is that halacha l'maisa. The Gemara suggests. So first of all, say again, we still don't have complete resolution with our mashkin case. Again, I'm not out of time to be able to give you the halacha l'maisa. But Emir Hashem, again, we're going to see two Rambams. So we'll say just to keep in mind what we still have. So first of all, we have a number of very important halachas that come out over here. First of all, again, halacha l'maisa, like items can't spread tumah to each other. So again, kalim can't give it to kalim, mashkin can't give it to mashkin, and ochlin can't give it to ochlin. But halacha l'maisa, mashkin could give to ochlin, ochlin could give to mashkin, and kalim could give to both mashkin and ochlin. That's number one, I will say. Number two, what we still have not fully established is the nature of tumas mashkin in general. So halacha l'maisa, will say what is the halacha of tumas mashkin? What is the halacha midoraisa? What is the halacha midrabanan? It's clear that midrabanan, there at least midrabanan, there is a spread, but or I should say an ability of mashkin to contract and convey tumah. What the halacha is doraisa? I think maybe what I'm going to do is tomorrow's a little bit of a shorter daf. Emir Hashem, we will get to that halacha l'maisa tomorrow.